definitely the key for me to our team becoming more innovative has been about that freedom to fail and almost forcing them to fail. Sometimes I'll push something beyond where I know that it's safe. If I know that not getting it right is not going to cause a major issue. You don't want to cause a system to go down for a week, but there are things where we can try something that we know is not going to work out, showing people that there's no consequence to that.
As children, we embraced failure. When we learnt to walk, we attempted to stand, took a few tiny steps, and fell over. But we were supported by loving parents who offered rounds of applause and smiles, helping us master this new skill. Yet, as adults, the fear of failure sometimes prevents us from trying new things, especially in environments that only celebrate success or condemn failure. But the freedom to fail is popular in Silicon Valley. Successful leaders encourage the right type of failure. Elon Musk says, failure is an option. If things are not failing, you are not innovating enough. And Thomas Watson of IBM famously said, the fastest way to succeed is to double your failure rate. Yet, encouraging and embracing failure can be challenging. So what sorts of failure should we encourage? And how can we embed a culture of innovation in our organizations? I'm Elliott Donazzan, a tech entrepreneur and CEO, and I strive to motivate my team to continually push boundaries, innovate, and test the status quo. On today's episode of Lessons from Local Government Leaders, our guest is someone who embodies this spirit within her team and council. I'm delighted to introduce Sharon Bowman. Sharon is an exceptional leader who consistently challenges conventional thinking by asking, what's the worst that can happen? Sharon has always had a passion for technology, starting with her family's purchase of an Apple Mac IIe. Sharon currently holds the position of Manager, Technology and Transformation at Hornsby Shire Council. Welcome, Sharon. Sharon, I've been really eager to interview you because you were the first local government leader that actually introduced me to local government sector. You might not know that, but I attended one of the webinars that you did almost 3 years ago to the day on a Microsoft Dynamics transformation project that you ran. And I hadn't worked with local government at that point, but with the business that I run, Payable, I was looking for an exciting segment, and you really opened my eyes to local government. So thank you for that.
That's amazing.
Now, for our listeners today, I want to start even earlier than I normally would. So let's start with school. Can you tell me, what did you want to be when you were at school and why?
Oh my goodness, that's a really interesting question because I've ended up nowhere near where I thought I would.
Really?
So yeah, I think my earliest, after you get over the I want to be a teacher because that's all you know kind of stage, I think that my earliest actual thing that I wanted to do was be a lawyer. And so the only last bits of that I've got are that I'm really good at contract negotiation. Then I wanted to be a journalist because I've always liked writing
and this was
talking.
high school?
This was all high school.
Okay.
Yeah. So they were the two things that I thought that I would like to do, which were both about words. And then I ended up studying accountancy when I went to uni. So that was about numbers. So something completely different.
So you're now an IT and transformation leader.
Yes.
Now, we won't go into the role right now, but tell me about the shift. How did we move from journalism to accountancy?
That's an excellent question, and I think it was really because I'd realised that journalism was probably not going to be a great career, but I still couldn't figure out what I wanted to do.
As in financially, or?
I think probably that was a bit of a bit of it for me at that age. I did sort of get to the point where I thought that I wanted to have a financially rewarding career, but doing something that I loved. And I think journalism at that stage already, I think it's even more so now, doesn't really seem to have a lot of a future because everyone's a citizen journalist these days, and there's a very small handful of journalists that you actually respect and say would be what we always thought journalism was supposed to be, and everybody else is just being sensationalist. I think I started to appreciate that in my late school years and thought, no, that's not who I want to be. So then I couldn't work out what I wanted to do, and I thought I'll just do an economics degree. And in my first year of doing economics, came across the idea of accounting firms and thought that our friend actually suggested that I should go for a cadetship with an accounting firm. And so I thought, oh, nothing ventured, nothing gained. So I started writing, as you did back in those days, snail mail letters to a couple of different accounting firms asking about cadetships. And I managed to have a small firm offer me the very first one that they ever did was a cadetship for me. They created it for me. And so I thought, well, I better actually study accounting, professional accounting, which wasn't what I started off doing. So. And
you became a chartered accountant.
I did become a chartered accountant. Yes, right. That's right. So because I loved it once I started doing it, I really got into this cadetship. They paid for all my uni fees and everything, but the trade-off was that I would go in all my uni breaks and work, and then that turned into a part-time job that I would work on the days that I wasn't at uni. And by the end of my university, I was really loving it and progressing really quickly in that career. But then a few years later, realised that I didn't want to do that for the rest of my life. And so that led to my next career change.
So tell us, so when did that, and it might not align perfectly when the career change happened, but when did your passion for, let's say, tech or transformation begin? Was it even maybe school or your parents or during the time, inspiration from them? Tell me about that.
Oh, so technology. In year 7, I had a maths teacher who was, I think, we used to say she was 80, but I'm sure she was probably in her late 50s. And she was a really early adopter of computers, and I'm showing my age here, but she organised for the school to get its very first Apple IIe computer, and she ran a computer club at school. And then I really got into that, and my parents wanted to support that, so we got a home computer back when I'm sure the Apple IIe computer that we got back then was about the price that a small car would be these days, or the equivalent. They were really expensive back then, but the mum and dad wanted to support me in that. So I've just always had an interest, and when I did my degree, I did some computer classes, and so I learnt some very basic programming skills, etc. And then when I went into the accounting firm, and it was just when accounting firms were going from drawing things out and manually putting them on pieces of paper to actually having computer software to do it. And I sort of took over managing the tiny little network that they had in this accounting firm, and became the expert in the software and did all of the computer things, because all of the older accountants that worked there didn't have any interest at all, and they needed somebody to do it. So I've just always had that interest in computing.
That would have evolved from natural fun and curiosity, let's say, at home.
Yes.
And the great way for your parents to sort of foster that in a way through just activity at home. Then in the workplace as a CA, you probably weren't thinking that IT would become such a big part of your career. But no. So let's now wind ahead a little bit. Mm-hmm. So, because there's kind of that shift into local government. Did you shift into, say, technology roles before that?
Yes. So my next step out of accounting was to actually go and work for the software company that provided the software that we used in our accounting firm.
What year would this have been?
Oh, gosh, we were like mid-90s at this point.
Yep.
And so I worked with this firm that's a professional accounting software supplier, and I ended up running their country offices in Malaysia and Singapore for a couple of years, and then came back to Australia, and I ran the services in the New South Wales branch. And so for me, it was always about using software to make people's lives better. For me, software, I'm not interested in software for its own devices. For me, it's about how can software be an enabler of either improving the way we do things in our organisation or improving the service that we deliver to our customers. That, to me, there's only 2 reasons why you would do something on a computer rather than doing it, the old manual way that we may have always done it, and that's what they are. And so I was always looking for ways. I was always the person who would be talking to, when I was the customer, I would be talking to the vendor and saying, hey, here's some ideas. And when I was on the inside and working for the software company, I was always putting through suggestions about how we could improve this or that. and make it better.
So let's look at that shift into local government. You were running the offices for the software company,
yes,
and then you sat back and you said, local government, that's what I want to do. What happened?
Yeah, so there was another little transition piece in there. So that unfortunately, late 90s .com boom and then bust.
Right.
And so I found myself where I'd worked myself into a position within this, the software company, that unfortunately then got made redundant because I had this real interest in how we could improve things. I got moved into a product management role, and then a different CEO came along and said, I don't like that structure, and he got rid of all the product management roles. Now I'm a free agent, and I was contacted by a former manager who had been a victim of a previous redundancy, and he said, I've got someone that I think you should talk to. He runs a consultancy firm and I think you'd be really great. And so I got this introduction that literally day after I found out that I was being made redundant. And I met with this guy who ran this consultancy firm, and he said, we do a lot of work with local government. I said, I know nothing about local government. He said, that's okay, you can learn. What you do in terms of coming in and looking how to improve things, how to make things better, and you think very strategically, is exactly what I'm looking for. So I started my career, and I spent many years working as a consultant across a broad range of organisations, of which probably about 80% were local government.
What's really interesting to me there is we kind of have a parallel path.
Yeah.
I started my career at PwC as a consultant. I'm a air quotes around like business person, not a technology person. Didn't study engineering. I studied commerce, management, and economic strategy. But I'm now in a technology role, and specifically the entry to local government. What this person made that introduction to you and used those analogies around. It's strategy, it's resource allocation. It's all the stuff don't worry about the sector.
Yes.
3 years ago when I was, we were working with some utilities in our business, and I was looking at local government and thought, this is going to make sense. And we sort of paralleled that over different timelines, that we found this, a sector that hopefully we both love and really enjoy, but also it allows us to do quite interesting things in terms of take some leaps in technology transformation, and deliver to communities of thousands of people. Like if you think of the where councils touch on people, often if you're in the business world, I see that the average, let's say medium-sized business that, let's say $20 to $50 million revenue, has a significantly smaller impact on the lives of people, or a significantly smaller team. Yet councils are just amazing in the services they have to offer, but all the complexity that comes with that.
And I think also it's the different focus, coming from, being in private enterprise, and it was all about making money. Whereas in local government, it really just is about service delivery and doing the best we can with what we have. All of our residents pay rates. That's where 70% of our income comes from, and we need to be custodians of that revenue and do the right thing with it and be as efficient and as effective as we can, but deliver the best service we can. And to me, that's just such a great focus for what we're doing in transformation, which is trying to help our colleagues be as efficient and effective as they can and deliver the best service that they can. So I think what my passion has always been is really well aligned with local government, where I don't always have that direct interface with the customer, but I know that everything we do is about that customer and that community and making their lives better.
Let's wind back quickly. So Sharon, today you're looking back at Sharon, who's the day before starting their first job in local government. What's the one or two sound bites of wisdom that you'd tell that Sharon, of words of advice or things you've learned?
Oh goodness. The company politics is very difficult. And what was really interesting is working as a consultant into local government. I probably made a lot of judgments about people I was working for and why they couldn't make things happen faster and get things done more, execute on things more effectively. and then getting into local government, I've realised just how much politics, both from the the political side of things. We have councillors that we report to.
Actual politics as well as
yes.
The politics.
But then there's the corporate politics and the number of different stakeholders that are involved. As you said, we have a very complex mix of services, and so we have a very complex mix of people that we deal with. So that people side of things, the politics and the pace of change. So make sure you know who all of your right stakeholders are, get them engaged as early on in the process as you possibly can. Mm-hmm. And if you want to be able to make things happen, you really do need to make sure that you're keeping an eye on people who can help and people who can hinder that progress.
What helped you understand and learn and navigate? For example, did you have a mentor that actually helped explain how the politics...
Yeah, my director is absolutely fantastic, and he has both modelled and, mentored me in that regard, and making sure that we are always staying on top of stakeholders, politics, how what we're doing is being perceived elsewhere in the organisation, etc. So definitely making sure, I'm lucky that it is my direct manager, but if you don't have that, then definitely having a mentor who can help you through that is really important.
And do you do any mentoring to perhaps younger leaders or others in local government?
Not formally, although that's something that I would definitely like to do, but I'm always open to speaking to people and giving advice where I can.
So you'll probably get a few listeners reaching out on email to you. That's fantastic. So let's talk about your role here at Hornsby Shire Council. So tell us the title and how long have you been in the role?
So I'm the Manager of Technology and Transformation. I've been in the role for 3.5 years now, which, if you can do the calculation, I started in January 2020, which was sensational timing because I came in just in time for COVID to hit and all of my plans to be derailed by having to facilitate the whole organisation to go and work from home. What
was it like when suddenly it was, hey, everyone's at home? What did it feel like? Oh, well, we weren't on Teams and then we were and stuff didn't work, but then it kind of did. One, everything you've been planning, forget about it, it's on ice maybe? What was that like? It's
a really interesting question. I was still trying to work out who my team were and what everybody was capable of. And then this happened, and I think I went into super planner mode and just, problem solving mode. And how are we going to do this? It wasn't, thankfully, everyone's going home tomorrow. We had a little bit of notice. So we started to work on, our organisation said, let's do some business continuity planning, and actually arranged for certain people around the organisation to go and work from home, and they were sort of almost the designated survivors. So the first thing we had was that we had to get those people mobilised to work from home. We were very lucky. We had some technologies in place already that facilitated us to be able to get people to work from home. We already had a virtual desktop scenario. We'd already moved to, we were on Skype for Business at that point in time. We already had Skype in place. So people could go home, log into any computer on their virtual desktop and be working as if they were in the office. So we were lucky in some ways, but there was still quite a lot to do to mobilise. Lots of people didn't have a spare computer because obviously the kids were being sent home at the same time. And so you might have had one computer in your household, but 4 people who had to suddenly be working or studying from home in some cases. So we had to find devices that we could give out to people. So we just planned it all out, and the whole team pulled together really well and just executed on this planning that we did to get everybody home and working effectively. And I don't think anybody had more than a half a day of downtime in the whole process, which was absolutely amazing. And I think it was a really good lesson for us, both in terms of how we could actually rally together and make a project happen on a very tight time frame and be very agile, but also in terms of what that team was capable of. And I don't think they even really had fully realised what they could achieve while still sort of keeping the lights on and everything else happening. If you asked them at the time, and I did ask them, they would have all said they had no spare capacity to take on projects, and we're already so busy doing just what we do. And then we found all of this ability to muck in and get this project done. So
that's great.
Yeah. And actually the biggest part wasn't so much getting the people working from home. There was a side project, which was that we also had to get our council meetings running remotely, and that was something that had never even been contemplated in the history of councils in Australia. Everyone had always had to be physically present in the meeting room, and then suddenly with COVID, everybody had to dial in and do that from home. And that was actually way more complex than just running a Teams meeting because of all of the protocols that go around council meetings. And so we had that going alongside the need to actually mobilise everybody to work from home as well.
So can I ask you about, let's say you had the strategy or the plans that were maybe on the whiteboard or even a little bit more cemented before COVID, and then obviously COVID happened and things changed. We can look at it as simply as, there was a replanning period once things went back to normal-ish. But did what you saw your team do and how, you rapidly evolve in technology, new ways of working, did that fundamentally alter any of the plans or even accelerate them?
It did actually. It was an interesting question because a lot of people at the time said COVID derailed a lot of their plans. But for us, it accelerated. Once we got over that hump, it accelerated a lot of the other things that we were planning to do for a number of reasons. One was because we saw what we were capable of when we just knuckled down and got into it. But the other thing being that COVID did drive a lot of need to digitise processes. So there was a lot of demand on us to make sure that where we might have previously pushed pieces of paper around to make something happen, that there was a digital way of doing that. And that went on well beyond just that COVID lockdown. It just became more of a part of doing business. We've come back to a hybrid environment, and so nobody wants to be tied to having to, print something or physically get a piece of paper through the internal mail or whatever some of our older processes might have been. So absolutely, it changed the shape of what we were doing. It also changed the timelines that we thought we were capable of.
So Hornsby now for 3 years.
Yes.
What's something that you're really proud of delivering to the community or council, or perhaps even something smaller for your team and how you've empowered them?
Picking one thing is quite difficult because I'm actually proud of a lot. But what I will say is the thing that I think I'm the most proud of is how the team has come along for the journey and are now delivering way more than anybody thought was possible before we started, with very similar resourcing. We haven't, doubled our resources. We've tweaked a few things around the edges in terms of how our resourcing is allocated to different tasks. We did get, I think, 1 or 2 extra people, but overall, we're very similar headcount to where we started, but we're achieving so much more. We're just, churning through a lot of transformation projects.
And what is it? Is it pace? Is it quality? Is it both that you've been able to accelerate?
It is both. It's mainly the pace of what people think is possible and the way that we approach things being more agile, just getting in, get it done. It's okay to do something, realise that didn't work, pivot, do it a slightly different way. We don't have to plan and think about every possible eventuality before we actually say, yes, we're going to get started with this. We get started and we learn along the way. And I think in the past there was very much more of a culture of making sure that we had every I dotted, every T crossed, every possible eventuality considered before we would sign off on even starting something. And it's not really a good way to innovate. You need to be more agile and just get in and give it a go.
So that freedom to innovate, which you're talking a little bit there, like a little bit of freedom to fail as well, that
Absolutely.
gives you the license to take that risk. At Hornsby, innovation is one of the values it's embedded in the culture. It's in a lot of the corporate documents as well. Is there anything you're thinking of other, maybe even transformation leaders that are probably going, God, that sounds like something I'd love to ensure I can bring to my team? Are there a couple of things you could share or moments that you thought, wow, this is, I should have done this, this was a great idea that they could learn from?
So I think definitely the key for me to our team becoming more innovative has been about that freedom to fail and almost forcing them to fail. Sometimes I'll push something beyond where I know that it's safe, if I know that not getting it right is not going to cause a major issue. You don't want to cause a system to go down for a week, but there are things where we can try something that we know is not going to work out, and then showing people that there's no consequence to that. That was a really good experiment. It didn't work. What's something that we can learn from that? And really accelerating that learning actually required some examples, because it's not always a part of the way people have been managed in the past.
And when you say examples, do you mean actually putting a project in place and demonstrating how things might fail? Like actually, all right, here's what's going to, and you create those conditions so the team can see what happens when you see them through. Something that I often found with my company was particularly on new starters or people that have come from other orgs, and it's not the freedom to innovate, which has to mean a little bit of freedom to fail, is introducing the framework of type 1 and type 2 decisions. So type 1 decisions are the one-way door. They're irreversible. It's once you make a mistake, you can't go back.
Yes.
They're the types of decisions we actually don't want to give license and freedom to fail on. But type 2 decisions, they're those decisions that it doesn't really matter. So there can often be things that are optimizations, or they're things that can be rolled back and reversed. I have to often emphasize, it doesn't mean they're not customer facing. Often people think, anything that touches the customer is irreversible. No, people can learn and change. But I talk with my teams, we actually split them. What are the type 1 decisions for these? What are the hypotheses there that are type 1? And let's generate more hypotheses to test for type 2. And that often gives people, it's actually me as a leader providing, this is where you're allowed to fail, yes, and this is where you're not. And often there's decisions that are in type 2 that people actually thought were type 1 because they've placed the oh no, but we can't put something in a customer. What if in front of a customer? What if that changes? Customers are, that's type 1. No, that's not type 1. We can roll it back so long as they understand. So is there any, if you think of, say, surprising type 1 and type 2 decisions, have you ever used that framework or anything like that with the team?
Well, I haven't actually used that language, but that's a really great way to put it. But certainly, there are things, as you say, you go through this door, once we make this decision, there's no going back, and we definitely would take more time to stress test those decisions. But there's others where a great example, I think, is actually our decision to proceed with our cloud transformation. And we had some ageing infrastructure that was reaching end of life, and we went through a whole process of meeting with Microsoft and one of their partners, and did the economic assessment of moving to the cloud, etc. And there was a lot of fear around this process, but more so than the concern that the decision wasn't the right one was the skepticism that we could get it done in the time frame before this ageing infrastructure became an issue. And what if we don't get it done in the time frame and the infrastructure starts to fail, and really we should just replace the infrastructure and go for another cycle of having it all on premise. And I said, well, what's the worst case scenario? So what's the worst case scenario? What if we tried this and we didn't meet the timeline? What would happen then? What could we do? Oh, well, actually, we could probably limp along with the infrastructure we had for another year if we needed to. And so I said, well, let's try. Let's just see what happens. If we do this and we don't meet the timelines, then we'll go to plan B. But let's try and see if plan A actually works. And all this skepticism that a project that we were trying to fit into 3 months was actually a 6 to 9 month project. But let's just see what would happen. And we actually went ahead and we got the project done in the 3 months.
So not only were you able to articulate the business case or the downside protection to and rally the stakeholders, you also then actually delivered the project.
We actually delivered,
so
yes.
That's a double win.
Yeah,
no,
exactly.
Well
but I knew that if we hadn't, and there was actually, when I say we got it done in 3 months, the scope of what we were moving to Azure, we got done in 3 months, but there were some other apps that were moving to SaaS as a part of our migration, and it was that actually took beyond the 3 months, and we had to keep limping along with that, running that on the old infrastructure for longer than we had intended to. So part of the project was a vast success, part of the project was a bit of a fail, but it was a fail that didn't matter. And so when we got to the final end of the project and we were able to completely decommission our infrastructure, we had a huge party because we'd finally got there, but we learned lessons along the way about what can be done rapidly, what might take a little bit longer, what goes wrong when you bring more vendors into the mix, all of that sort of thing.
So it's one thing for your team to be empowered to embrace failure, but how do you communicate that to senior leaders or the exec and the rest of the organisation that you might not achieve success and that's okay?
Look, I think part of it is, to be honest, how much you communicate. So when things are not going perfectly, we may not give all of the details of that failure, if you want to call it that in inverted commas, to the organisation. We'll talk about, project delays. We'll talk about, reshuffling of priorities. We won't be completely frank with all of our stakeholders about exactly everything that's gone wrong, particularly when the failures are short term and we've pivoted and we're doing it a different way, and so all it's really done is delayed the project. So I think definitely where you have the more stakeholders you have involved, the more you need to get them on board with, right from the start, we're going to try doing it this way, and it's going to be an iterative process, and we might learn things along the way, and we might end up somewhere very different to where we started. So that's the external stakeholder and bringing them on that journey. Again, I think it's different language in how you communicate it to different stakeholder groups. In terms of my manager, again, and our executive leadership team, I'm a little bit more upfront with them about, we need to be innovative, and to be innovative means that sometimes not everything goes right. And so for the most part, I will be speaking to them about, this project has taken a little longer because we've learned some lessons about how to do things a bit differently. But yeah, I don't think we post-mortem everything with a really wide audience. We try and keep that in-house as much as possible.
In these situations, do you ever try and bring in perhaps that more senior stakeholder and almost present back to them, like, here was what we set out to discover. We found this, and the lessons were, and you actually really, and sometimes the lessons are so obvious, like, well, we shouldn't have, we won't do that again. Yes. But you kind of drum up a little bit that this was and that becomes, I guess it's proving that it's become organisational knowledge, if you will. Have you followed that approach before?
I'm trying to think of an example that I can give you because yes, it's a little bit different for every project, obviously, but certainly that communication of the transparency around when we started this project, we were hoping, going back to our cloud transformation, certainly the initial communication was, we're going to the cloud, everything's going to be done by a certain date, and then we'll decommission the infrastructure and that'll be gone. And then we had to sort of say, well, so all of our Azure transformation is done, but we've still got some other things that need to move. That's changed because we learned X, Y, Z. And so there is definitely a communication and a process of understanding that things in IT aren't linear. And that you embark on a project, you learn things along the way, you have to pivot, you have to roll with the punches, and we will eventually get somewhere, or very, very rarely will it be we've gone so far down a track with something and then we've just stopped altogether and said, well, we're not going to continue with that at all. It's usually learning a different way to reach the outcome, because at the end of the day, we don't do projects just for fun. There's always an outcome that you're trying to get to. So it's just learning the different ways that don't work until you find the way that does get you to the outcome that you're looking for. I
want to talk about women in tech. So if I obviously follow you on LinkedIn, and I've read a lot of your writings and your interviews, and have been to webinars that you've run. And I've seen that you do a lot to promote women in tech, particularly in the public sector. What piece of advice would you recommend to emerging female leaders, but in technology in particular?
I think it's really interesting that women haven't typically chosen tech as a career. I think it can be a fantastic career for women, but I think that it's about understanding the different ways that you can do tech. You don't need to be an engineer or a cybersecurity expert, although there's no reason why you can't be. But there are a lot of other ways to explore tech as a career. And I think that the perception of it as being a male career just needs to be broken down. And women who have an interest in tech or in using tech to make people's lives better can use the special to really stereotype, but I think women generally have more soft skills than men, and particularly men who choose tech as a career, can tend to have. And so the soft skills that we bring to the table with us more naturally can really add a lot to your ability to make a career in tech. I think that having that really good balance of the technical understanding, but also the soft skills that allow us to communicate more broadly and bring stakeholders on board and understand where users might be coming from, where customers are coming from. All of those types of skills are a really important part.
Customer, product, empathy and interaction.
Yeah, all of those things I think are really critical. And so I think what we're finding now is that, and again in my team, the men in the team we're building that skill set. They've got their really good technical skill set, but we're building the soft skills more and more. And for women, quite often they might come to the party with a bit more of that to begin with. So I would say back yourself if it's an area that you have an interest in, that you can really accelerate your career.
There are more men in these sorts of roles. Do you think there are obstacles in place of women trying to emerge in this field, or even if you were thinking of advising a male or female manager in this space, what could they do better to make sure that sort of development's fostered?
Yeah, I think that it has often been the stereotyping that has led to men being more dominant in the career. As
simple as men are better at technology, that kind of basic level.
That kind of basic level of stereotyping. I think that understanding what you need for different roles and what, rather than just automatically assuming that the more male characteristics are a good fit for everything in tech, to have a look at which roles are more tech heavy and which roles are less tech heavy, but also realising that there's nothing stopping women from getting those really deep technical skills as well. And sometimes the fact that they're able to communicate that in a more succinct manner doesn't necessarily mean they don't. Because if you're in an interview and somebody bamboozles you with all of their tech speak and somebody else is able to communicate that in a more down-to-earth sort of a way, doesn't necessarily mean the person who's got the better tech speak is the most technically adept. So making sure that you, as an employer or as a manager, understand the breadth of skills that are required and how to assess what skills a person has. Having said that, I do think as an employer that what I find is that when we go out looking for people for different roles, that the candidate pool for the more technical roles is extremely skewed towards men, and for the less technical roles might be less skewed towards men. So I would love to encourage girls in STEM and learning those more technical skills and being able to compete and being able to put themselves forward for those more technical roles, I think would be fantastic.
You're well known, you're trusted in the sector, and people enjoy listening to you. How do you keep learning and growing as a leader? Are you a member of any groups, mentors, or is it about more a personal time and discovery that you look at developing yourself and your skills?
I love going along to conferences, listening to other people speak at webinars. I think there's so much that we can learn from our peers, both in this industry and outside the industry. The reason why I like to go along to women in leadership or more broadly just to general technical type conferences is that I think that we can learn so much from people outside the industry who might be further ahead than us in certain areas. But even just within local government, I think everyone comes at the role that we all have from a slightly different angle and has slightly different priorities that might be set by their organisational politics and whatnot. And so, we can go along and learn what people are doing in different areas based on what their priorities are and bring that back to think about whether that changes our idea of what our priorities should be. They might have some amazing thing that they're doing that we've never even thought of. Well, we should be looking at that. I learn a lot from vendors as well, actually, because I think that, especially organisations like yours that are coming along with really great ideas to solve a problem that we knew we had, but we didn't know how that could be solved, I think is fantastic. And there's a number of smaller vendors that I think bring that to the table, as well as the innovation that the larger vendors are doing, the things that maybe Microsoft are doing in the modern work space. We can always learn things from that. And so ideas and enhancements can sometimes be driven by us saying, we need this, how can we find software to do that? Other times it can be the software says, you can now do this. Oh, great, how can we use that? And so it's a little bit of push and pull. But I think there's always things to be learned, and getting out and speaking to people and learning about what's going on out there is the best way to learn.
So Sharon, this is the Lessons from Local Government Leaders podcast. We've got one final question. Is there any other final advice? Is there any snippet of lesson that you could share to the audience? And maybe it is all the way back to young Sharon Bowman on that first, it was an Apple computer, wasn't it? That first computer, and was looking ahead at a glorious career in journalism. What didn't know she'd end up as the transformation manager? What's that final lesson that you want to hear? What's that final lesson that you want the listeners to hear from you today?
I think the greatest thing that you can do in your career is to find something that really means something to you. Not necessarily your passion, although it can be, but even just something that motivates you to get out of bed each day, be better, continue improving, continue growing.
Sharon Bowman, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Wow, so there you have it. That was Sharon Bowman on the importance of the freedom to fail and building a culture of innovation. I hope you enjoyed my chat with Sharon as much as I did. Thanks for listening to this episode of Lessons from Local Government Leaders. If you'd like to learn more and build your own network directly with other emerging leaders in the sector, head to govtech.org.au. You've been listening to Elliott Donazzan with Sharon Bowman, Manager, Technology and Transformation at Hornsby Shire Council.